The rough wood of the shelf pressed into my bare back, a splintering reality in the haze of a moment that should never have happened. His scent filled the small space, a dizzying mix of turpentine, rain-soaked cotton, and a raw male musk that belonged only to him, to Julian. Outside, a relentless autumn rain lashed against the high, grimy window of the art room's supply closet, each drop a tiny hammer against the glass, counting down the seconds of our stolen time. His lips were on my neck, desperate and hungry, his breath a hot promise against my skin that sent a shiver through my entire body, a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. My hands were tangled in his dark, damp curls, pulling him closer, even as my mind screamed at me to push him away. This was madness. He was my colleague. I was a wife. But in the suffocating darkness, surrounded by canvases and clay, we were just two starved souls, feeding a fire that had grown too large to control. And then, we heard it. The sharp, decisive click of heels on the linoleum floor of the hallway, moving closer. We froze, every muscle tensed. His eyes, a startling blue even in the dim light, locked with mine, and in them I saw the same wild terror that was clawing at my own throat. The footsteps slowed, paused right outside the door, and in that infinite silence, I could hear nothing but the frantic, guilty beating of my own heart. That fire, that all-consuming terror, it didn't begin there, in a cramped closet filled with shadows and regret. No, it started months earlier, with something far more innocent, far more dangerous. It began in the stale, predictable air of the teacher's lounge at Northwood High. My life, until then, had been a carefully constructed painting of suburban contentment. A lovely colonial house on a tree-lined street, a stable 10-year marriage to a good, reliable man named Mark, and a respectable career teaching literature to teenagers who were more interested in their phones. It was perfect on paper, but inside I was suffocating. Mark loved me, I suppose, in the way one loves a valuable, comfortable piece of furniture. He provided for me. He was kind, but he hadn't truly seen me in years. Our life was a quiet routine of shared calendars and polite questions about our day, a long, flat road with no turns. The teacher's lounge was the epicenter of that monotony, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and disillusionment. And it was there, on a dreary Tuesday morning, that Julian first walked in. He wasn't like the rest of us. He was the new art teacher, and he carried the vibrant, chaotic energy of his subject with him. He wore a faded denim jacket, there was a smudge of dried paint on his jaw, and when he smiled, his blue eyes held a spark of rebellion I thought had been extinguished in people our age. He looked at the room, at all of us with our tired faces and sensible shoes, and he didn't see a final destination. He saw a place to pass through. I didn't know it then, but as he poured himself a cup of the terrible coffee and his eyes met mine for the briefest of moments, the first crack in my perfect, hollow life had just appeared. In the beginning, it was all perfectly innocent, shrouded in the safe, sterile context of our profession. Our conversations were small talk, the kind of polite chatter that fills the spaces in a workday. We spoke about the curriculum, the baffling apathy of teenagers, the terrible quality of the coffee. Julian had a way of turning even the most mundane topic into something interesting. He'd compare the structural problems in a student's essay to the lack of composition in a poorly executed painting, and I, the literature teacher, found myself utterly captivated. He saw the world through a different lens, a frame of color, shape, and emotion, while I had been living in a world of black and white text. He was a novelty, a welcome distraction from the droning rhythm of my life. I told myself that my interest was purely intellectual, a professional curiosity. But I knew, even then, in some deep, unlit corner of my soul, that I was lying to myself. The teacher's lounge became our accidental sanctuary. I started timing my lunch breaks to his, a subconscious shift in my routine that felt seismic. While other teachers talked about their mortgages or their children's soccer practice, Julian and I would fall into our own bubble. He would ask me about the symbolism in the novels I was teaching, his blue eyes intense, with genuine interest. He didn't just ask to be polite. He listened, truly listened, absorbing my words, turning them over in his mind. In return, I would ask him about his art. He spoke of painters I had only read about with a passion that was almost tangible. He described the way light fell across a landscape, the violent energy in a single brushstroke, the soul of a person captured in a charcoal portrait. He talked with his hands, strong, capable hands, that were perpetually smudged with paint or clay, and I found myself watching them, mesmerized by their grace and power. I started to notice things, small details that lodged themselves in my memory. I noticed the way he'd push his dark, unruly hair off his forehead when he was concentrating. I noticed the worn leather band of his watch, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. I noticed the sound of his laugh, a low, warm rumble that seemed to momentarily chase away the fluorescent hum of the school lights. I began to crave that sound. At faculty meetings, I would find my eyes drifting to him. He'd be sketching idly on his notepad, a series of intricate, beautiful shapes emerging from the boredom, and I felt a strange sense of complicity, as if we were the only two people in the room who understood that there was a world beyond these four walls. We were allies in a quiet, undeclared war against mediocrity. Our conversations began to bleed out from the edges of our work life. We found we had the same taste in old films, the same love for rainy autumn days, the same cynical sense of humor. He told me he played the guitar, not well, but with passion. I confessed that I had once dreamed of being a poet, a confession I had never even made to Mark. With Julian, these buried parts of myself felt safe to surface. It felt like I was slowly reintroducing myself to a person I had forgotten long ago. A subtle intimacy grew between us, woven from shared glances across a crowded hallway and jokes whispered under our breath. He started leaving small things for me on my desk. A perfect crimson leaf he found on his walk to school, a book of poetry by an obscure artist he thought I would appreciate. They were innocent gestures, things a friend might do, but they felt charged with a significance that made my breath catch in my throat. I would hide them from Mark, tucking them into my bag like a guilty secret, because they were. They were evidence of a connection that was mine, and mine alone. I found myself dressing more carefully for work, choosing an outfit not for comfort or practicality, but with a silent question in my mind: what would Julian think? I started wearing the perfume Mark had bought me for our anniversary years ago, a scent he no longer even noticed, hoping that maybe Julian would. And one afternoon, he did. I was standing by the printer, and he came to stand beside me, waiting for his own documents. He was closer than usual, and I was intensely aware of the heat radiating from his body. "You smell nice, Alara," he said, his voice quiet, meant only for me. I don't know, like a library in a garden. It was such a strange, poetic compliment. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had said to me in years. I could only manage a small, shaky smile, my heart hammering against my ribs. In that moment, the pretense of professional curiosity shattered. This was something else. This was a deep, terrifying pull towards a man who was not my husband. The attraction was no longer just a spark. It was a slow-burning ember, glowing hotter with each passing day. Going home felt like stepping from a world of vibrant color back into a black and white film. Mark would greet me with a perfunctory kiss, his mind already on his emails. We'd eat dinner while the television news played, the silence between us filled with the noise of a world we weren't really a part of. I would look at him, this good, decent man I had promised my life to, and feel a profound and aching guilt. He hadn't done anything wrong. The fault was not in him, but in me. In the emptiness he could no longer fill, an emptiness that I now realized had a name, and a face, and a pair of startlingly blue eyes. Lying in bed at night, long after Mark's breathing had deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, I would think of Julian. I would replay our conversations, dissect his every word, his every look. A thrum of anticipation for the next day, for the next accidental meeting in the lounge, would course through me. It was a dangerous feeling, a sweet poison I was willingly drinking, and I knew, with a certainty, that both thrilled and horrified me, that I had no intention of stopping. The seed had been planted in the most mundane soil imaginable, but it was growing into something wild and beautiful and utterly ruinous. The days grew shorter, and the crisp autumn air began to carry the first real bite of winter. As the light outside my classroom window faded earlier each afternoon, a new routine began to take shape, an unspoken agreement that formed between us as naturally as breathing. The end of day bell would ring, a shrill, jarring sound that sent waves of students crashing out into the hallways, their boisterous energy quickly receding until only a profound silence was left behind. In this quiet, empty version of the school, Julian and I found our true space. We started staying late. The excuses were always plausible, always professional. I had essays to grade. He had canvases to prep. At first, we worked in our own classrooms, separated by a long, echoing corridor. But soon, he would find a reason to wander into my room. He'd lean against the doorframe, a cup of tea in his hands, and ask my opinion on a new project idea. Or I would walk down to the art room, drawn by the faint sound of music and the smell of oil paint, using the pretense of needing a piece of colored paper. These visits grew longer. The work became secondary. We would sit in the half-light of my classroom, the desks arranged in neat, empty rows around us, and we would simply talk. The conversations were different now, stripped of the professional veneer we wore during the day. Here, in the quiet intimacy of the deserted school, we began to speak a new, more dangerous language. It began with a subtle shift, a crack in the facade of his cheerful demeanor. One evening, he was staring out the window at the darkening sky, a thoughtful, melancholic expression on his face. "It's strange," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can spend your entire life with someone, share a home, a bed, and still feel like you're speaking a language they can't understand." He didn't mention Chloe by name, but he didn't need to. The words hung in the air between us, an offering of vulnerability, an invitation, and I accepted it. "I know what you mean," I replied, my own voice quiet. "Sometimes I feel like I'm a ghost in my own life. I move through the rooms of my house, I play my part, but no one really sees that I'm there." It was the truest thing I had said to anyone in years, and the moment it left my lips, I felt a terrifying sense of release. He turned from the window, and his eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, found mine. In them, I saw no pity, only a deep, profound recognition. He saw me. In that single shared glance, we confessed everything. The loneliness, the quiet desperation, the slow, numbing erosion of our souls within our safe, respectable marriages. From that day on, the unspoken language became our primary form of communication. The air between us grew thick with it, a constant humming tension that was both exhilarating and agonizing. Our eye contact was no longer casual. It became a conversation in itself, held for a beat too long across a crowded room, asking questions and giving answers that our mouths would never dare to form. We became masters of accidental touch. His fingers would brush against mine as he handed me a piece of chalk, a simple, meaningless contact that sent a jolt of pure electricity up my arm. I would walk past his desk, my hand grazing his shoulder, and the spot would tingle for hours afterward. We existed in a state of heightened awareness of each other's physical presence. If he stood behind me to look at a poem a student had written on the board, I could feel the heat from his body. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, and I would find it impossible to concentrate on the words in front of me. The breaking point, the moment the unspoken became almost deafening, happened on a rainy Thursday. We were the last two people in the building, aside from the janitor humming somewhere on the floor below. I was trying to put a heavy box of anthologies onto the highest shelf of my classroom bookcase, struggling on my tiptoes. "Here, let me," he said, his voice startlingly close behind me. He didn't wait for an answer. He simply stepped in, his chest brushing against my back as he easily lifted the box and settled it into place. For a moment, he didn't move away. His hands were still on the box, his body still pressed lightly against mine. I was trapped, pinned between the bookshelf and him. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder blade. I stopped breathing. The only sound was the drumming of the rain on the window pane and the frantic pounding in my own ears. He slowly lowered his arms and stepped back, but he turned as he did so, and his hand slid from the shelf down my arm, a deliberate, lingering caress that left a trail of fire on my skin. We were standing face to face, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, so close I could see the slight parting of his lips. The space between us was an inch, a universe, filled with a tension so powerful I thought I might shatter. This was it, the moment where a look becomes a touch becomes a kiss, and a friendship becomes an affair. I saw the question in his eyes, the same desperate question that was screaming in my own mind. He lifted his hand, as if to touch my face, and his fingers trembled slightly. But then, from down the hall, we heard the jangle of the janitor's keys. The spell was broken. Julian dropped his hand, as if he'd been burned, taking a half step back. A nervous, shaky laugh escaped my lips. "Thanks," I stammered, my voice sounding foreign and high-pitched. I should be getting home. Mark will be waiting." The mention of my husband's name was like a douse of cold water. Julian just nodded, his throat working, his eyes clouded with a mixture of desire and regret. He turned and walked out of my classroom without another word. I stayed there for a long time, my hand pressed to my chest, trying to calm my racing heart. Driving home through the slick, rain-swept streets, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Nothing had happened, and yet, everything had changed. The unspoken language was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. We had stood on the very edge of the cliff, and the only thing that had stopped us from jumping was the sound of a key in a lock. But we both knew we would be back at that cliff's edge again. And next time, there might be nothing to stop us from falling. The days that followed were a study in exquisite torture. The unspoken language that had been our secret now felt like a scream trapped in a soundproof room. Every time our eyes met across the faculty lounge, I felt the memory of his body pressed against mine, the ghost of his hand on my arm. The tension was no longer a gentle hum. It was a high-frequency vibration, a wire pulled so taut I was certain it would snap. We avoided being alone, a mutual, silent agreement that we were not to be trusted with solitude. The near miss had scared us, but the fear was secondary to the raw, undeniable wanting it had exposed. We were like magnets, forcefully held apart, and the strain of it was becoming unbearable. And then, it was Friday. The school emptied in a torrent of youthful energy, leaving behind the familiar, hollow silence of the weekend. I was packing my bag, my movements slow, reluctant to go home to the quiet predictability of my life with Mark, when Julian appeared at my classroom door. He didn't lean against the frame casually, as he usually did. He stood straight, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, a nervous energy about him that I had never seen before. "Alara," he said, and my name on his lips was both a plea and a command. "Before you leave, I finished that piece I was telling you about. I'd like you to see it." It was a simple invitation, but we both knew it was something more. It was a choice. I could say no, I could plead tiredness, I could walk out of that school and drive home, and perhaps, just perhaps, the wire between us would slacken. But I was so tired of being sensible, so tired of being safe. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I followed him down the deserted hallway, the sound of my sensible teacher's shoes echoing unnervingly in the quiet. His art room was a world away from the rest of the school. Here, chaos and creativity reigned. The air was thick with the sharp, intoxicating scents of turpentine and linseed oil. Canvases of all sizes were stacked against the walls, some blank and full of promise, others alive with frantic, vibrant color. The vast, north-facing windows were streaked with paint, and the late afternoon sun streamed through them, casting long, golden shafts of light through the dusty air. Soft, melancholic music drifted from a small speaker in the corner. This room was a reflection of him, passionate, messy, and achingly beautiful. He didn't turn on the main lights, leaving us in the ethereal glow of the setting sun. He led me to a large canvas on an easel in the center of the room. It was an abstract, a maelstrom of deep blues and violent slashes of crimson and gold. It was breathtaking. "I call it the quiet roar," he said softly, standing beside me, not looking at the painting but at my face, gauging my reaction. I started, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't describe it. I could only feel it. It was the feeling of a scream held back, of a storm gathering just offshore. It was the last few weeks of my life, rendered in oil and pigment. It's about the feeling of wanting something so badly, it feels like it's tearing you apart from the inside, he explained, his voice low and intimate. but having to keep it all perfectly silent, perfectly still on the surface. He had painted us. He had painted the unbearable tension, the unspoken language. He had painted my soul. He turned to face me then, and the space between us disappeared. "What do you see, Alara?" he whispered, his eyes searching mine. I couldn't speak. I could only look at him, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. He was so close. I could feel the warmth of him, see the tiny pulse beating in his neck. He lifted his hand, the one that I had watched, had dreamed of, and he placed it gently on my waist. The touch was not accidental. It was a question, a declaration. It was ownership, and I did not pull away. I leaned into it, a silent surrender. The air crackled. The world seemed to slow down, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, the only things still moving. He lowered his head, and I lifted mine, a final, inevitable closing of the distance that had separated us for months. His lips met mine. At first, the touch was impossibly soft, tentative, a gentle exploration. It was a moment of pure, suspended disbelief. This is happening. And then, a groan escaped his throat, a sound of deep, guttural relief, and the kiss changed. It became what we both needed it to be, a desperate, hungry release. All the unspoken words, all the stolen glances, all the suppressed longing poured into that single, frantic act. His other hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer still. My bag slid from my shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud, the sound swallowed by the intensity of the moment. My hands, acting of their own accord, came up to frame his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the surprising softness of his skin. I kissed him back with a ferocity that shocked me, a raw, primal need that I didn't know I possessed. He tasted of coffee and something uniquely him, a taste I knew instantly I would be addicted to. He pressed me backward until I was leaning against a sturdy workbench, scattering charcoal pencils that rolled and clattered onto the floor. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was raw and clumsy and desperate. It was perfect. When we finally broke apart, we were both gasping for air, our foreheads resting against each other. His eyes were dark, with a passion that mirrored my own. We didn't speak. There were no words for what had just happened. We had just rewritten our entire world, broken the most sacred rule. I had stepped into his classroom as a colleague, a friend, a married woman. I knew, as I stood there trembling in his arms, my lips still tingling from the force of his kiss, that I would be leaving it as something else entirely. The first transgression was complete, and deep down, in the most treacherous part of my heart, I felt no regret, only the terrifying, exhilarating certainty that it was just the beginning. The kiss in the art room had not quenched the fire. It had thrown gasoline onto the embers. It wasn't enough. It was a brutal, beautiful taste of something I now knew I could not live without. In the days that followed, we moved through the school in a daze of shared secrecy. The wire of tension had snapped, and in its place was a taut, invisible cord that now bound us together. We didn't need to speak of what came next. We saw it in each other's eyes every time we passed in the hall, a raw, frantic hunger. The decision was made with a few whispered words at the end of a long week, his voice low and rough in my ear as I was leaving. "Next Friday," he said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "Meet me in the back parking lot after your last class. Just be there." And I simply nodded, my heart hammering. The week was the longest of my life, a fever dream of anticipation. I was a ghost in my own home, my mind miles away, counting down the hours. I would look at Mark across the dinner table and feel a pang of something, not guilt, not yet, but a strange, distant sorrow, as if I were already mourning a life I was about to leave behind. When Friday finally came, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip my car keys. I walked to the back lot as instructed, my steps feeling both leaden and weightless. His car was there, parked under the shade of a large oak tree, away from the main exit. I slipped into the passenger seat without a word. The silence in the car was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket filled with everything we couldn't say. He just drove. He didn't tell me where we were going. After a few minutes on the highway, he reached over and placed his hand on my thigh, his thumb stroking the fabric of my skirt. The touch was possessive, grounding. It said, "You are mine now." I covered his hand with my own, my fingers lacing through his, a silent confirmation. Yes. He took an exit that led to a string of anonymous, low-slung buildings, gas stations, fast food chains, and tired-looking motels. He pulled into the parking lot of one called the Crimson Peak Inn, its sign a faded, buzzing relic from another decade. It was perfect in its imperfection, a place utterly removed from our real lives. A place where we could be no one. He paid for the room in cash, a gesture of illicit secrecy that sent a thrill of danger through me. Walking behind him toward room 107, I felt a dizzying mix of shame and exhilaration. I was the respectable Mrs. Elara Vance, literature, teacher, wife, pillar of the community, about to commit the ultimate transgression in a cheap roadside motel. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, locking the rest of the world out, the fragile dam of our restraint broke completely. He had me pressed against the door before I could even take in the room, his mouth crashing down on mine. This kiss was not like the first one. There was no tenderness, no discovery. This was pure, desperate need. My bag dropped to the floor, forgotten. My hands clawed at his shirt, needing to feel his skin against mine. "Julian," I breathed against his lips, a weak, final protest from a part of me that was already lost. It's crazy." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his blue eyes blazing. "I know," he rasped, his voice thick with want. "I don't care, Lara. I need you. I've needed you from the first day." And that was it. All my defenses crumbled. He fumbled with the buttons of my blouse, his fingers clumsy with haste, and I heard a small pop as one came loose and skittered across the floor. He didn't seem to notice. He pulled the fabric apart, revealing the black lace bra I had chosen that morning with a sense of fatalistic purpose. A low groan rumbled in his chest. "You knew," he whispered, a statement of awe. "You wanted this too." He unhooked the bra and my breasts spilled into his hands, his touch both rough and reverent. "Oh God, Alara." Beautiful. He buried his face in my chest, his mouth hot on my skin, and a sound I didn't recognize escaped my own throat, a raw, needy whimper. He lifted me as if I weighed nothing and carried me the few feet to the bed, the cheap polyester comforter rough beneath my bare back. Clothes were torn away in a frantic, tangled mess. There was no grace, no elegance, only the raw, undeniable force of two bodies that had been aching for each other for months. As he moved over me, his body lean and hard, I felt a final flicker of the woman I was supposed to be. A voice screamed in my head, "This is wrong. This will ruin you." But then he entered me, a slow, deliberate slide that felt like coming home, and that voice was silenced forever. A sharp gasp escaped me, a mixture of pain and the most intense pleasure I had ever known. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice strained. I opened my eyes and he was there, his face taut with emotion, his eyes locked on mine. "Don't you dare look away," he said. And I didn't. I watched him as he began to move, a steady, powerful rhythm that was rocking the very foundation of my world. "Julian," I whispered, the name a prayer on my lips. "Please." I didn't even know what I was begging for. More. Deeper. Don't stop. He seemed to understand, his pace quickening, his thrusts growing stronger, harder, driving me toward a precipice I'd only ever read about in books. My last coherent thought was that this was not just sex, this was an exorcism, casting out years of loneliness and quiet desperation. And then, there were no more thoughts, only sensation, a blinding, shattering release that ripped a scream from my throat, my body arching off the bed to meet his final, powerful surge as he cried out my name. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the wreckage of the bedsheets and our former lives. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the low hum of the air conditioning unit. His sweat was slick on my skin. I could feel the heavy, slowing beat of his heart against my cheek. I had done it. We had done it. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. As the late afternoon sun cast long, dusty shadows across the room, I lay there in the arms of my lover, in a cheap motel room that smelled of disinfectant and sex, and I felt nothing but a profound, terrifying, and absolute sense of peace. My life was now cleaved in two, the time before this room and the time after. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I could never, ever go back. Walking back into my house that first evening was like stepping onto a stage set of my own life. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The scent of lemon polish in the air, the mail neatly stacked on the console table, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. But I was different. I was an imposter, a stranger wearing Alara Vance's clothes. Mark was in the kitchen, and he smiled as I walked in, a familiar, easy smile that suddenly felt like a judgment. "Hey, long meeting?" he asked, stirring a pot on the stove. The first lie slid from my lips with a terrifying ease. "You have no idea," I said, managing a weary laugh. "Curriculum planning. It never ends." He nodded, accepting it without a second thought, and in that moment, my new life began. It was a life cleaved in two, a schizophrenic existence of light and shadow, and I was the sole frantic actress playing both parts. My world with Mark became the shadow. It was a life lived in monochrome, a series of polite routines and hollow gestures. Every dinner we shared felt like a betrayal. His kindness was a physical weight, his touch a brand of guilt upon my skin. One night, as we were watching a movie, he reached for my hand, his fingers lacing through mine in a gesture of casual affection he had done 1,000 times before. But this time, my body recoiled. His hand felt foreign, his touch an unwelcome intrusion into a body that no longer belonged entirely to him. I had to force myself not to pull away, to endure the contact, my skin crawling, my mind screaming. I felt a profound self-loathing, yet it was dwarfed by the vibrant, technicolor reality of my other life, my real life with Julian. Our world was a stolen masterpiece, painted in secret, vibrant strokes. It existed in the front seat of his car, parked in the hushed quiet of a deserted park, the windows fogged with our breath. It lived in the frantic, stolen minutes in the back room of the school library, surrounded by the dusty smell of old books, our kisses silencing the words we couldn't speak. In these moments, I wasn't an imposter. I was more myself than I had been in a decade. I was alive, every nerve ending singing, every sensation amplified. The world seemed sharper, the colors brighter, the air richer. Julian saw me, the real me, the one who had been buried under years of sensible choices and quiet compromise, and he wanted her. That feeling was a drug, a potent addiction that I had no desire to fight. We became meticulous architects of our deceit. We created a shared, anonymous email account with a subject line so boring no one would ever look twice: Regional Curriculum Committee. Our messages were a masterclass in code. "I've uploaded the revised syllabus for your review," he would write, and I would know it meant, "I can't stop thinking about the way you looked this morning." My reply, "Looks good, but let's discuss Section 3 in person after school," translated to, "Meet me in the auditorium, 4 p.m. The school, once a place of mundane routine, transformed into our clandestine playground, a landscape of thrilling risks. Every hallway was a potential site for a charged, fleeting glance. Every closed door was a possibility. We were drunk on the danger, on the audacity of it all. We made love in the most improbable, reckless places. Once, we snuck onto the stage of the empty auditorium, the only light coming from the single, spectral ghost lamp left burning in the center. Surrounded by the vast, cavernous darkness, with the faint smell of dust and old velvet in the air, he laid me down on the spot where generations of students had performed their innocent school plays. And there, on that stage, we performed our own dark, passionate drama, our whispers and moans swallowed by the immense, silent space. The irony was not lost on me. My entire life had become a performance, and this was the only place I felt truly honest. The constant vigilance was exhausting. At work, we had to maintain a careful, professional distance, a charade that was becoming increasingly difficult to uphold. A simple conversation about a student could be layered with a dozen secret meanings, a hidden dialogue of desire passing between us that no one else could hear. The fear of discovery was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of everything. An unexpected knock on the classroom door when he was visiting, a colleague asking why my car was still in the lot so late, Mark calling to ask when I'd be home from my meeting. Each instance was a jolt of pure adrenaline, a heart-stopping reminder of how fragile our secret world was. My relationship with Mark deteriorated into a landscape of lies built upon lies. I became an expert at evasion, at creating a narrative of a busy, dedicated teacher, a narrative that he, in his trusting goodness, readily accepted. The guilt was a strange, mutable thing. Sometimes, when he would tell me he was proud of how hard I was working, it would hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless with self-disgust. But other times, lying in bed at night, wide awake next to his sleeping form, my body still tingling from a stolen hour with Julian, I felt an unsettling calm. I would look at the silhouette of this man I had promised to love and honor, this man whose trust I was methodically incinerating, and the most terrifying thought would surface from the depths of my new, corrupted heart. I don't regret this. I was living two lives, and I knew, with a certainty that should have horrified me, which one was real and which one was the lie. And every single day, I chose the lie that made me feel alive. The frantic, breathless encounters in storerooms and parking lots had served their purpose. They had broken the seal and unleashed the flood. But as the weeks bled into a month, our hunger changed. It was no longer enough to steal desperate, hurried moments. We needed more. We needed time. We needed a space, however temporary and anonymous, that was ours alone. The lies to our spouses had become a well-rehearsed script, a second language we were both fluent in. A teachers' conference in a neighboring town provided the perfect alibi, a full, uninterrupted afternoon. This time, when he pulled into the lot of a different motel, the Starlight Motor Inn, its name a sad, romantic fiction, the feeling was not one of shame, but of fierce, defiant purpose. We were not sneaking around, we were claiming our time. The room was identical to the first one, a sterile box of beige and brown, but we transformed it. It became our sanctuary. This time, there was no frantic rush, no tearing of clothes. The door had barely clicked shut when he pulled me to him, but the kiss was long and deep and slow. It was a kiss of rediscovery, of reaffirmation. It said, "Here we are, in our place." He undressed me with an artist's reverence, his hands gentle, his eyes taking in every inch of me as if he were memorizing a masterpiece. I, who had spent years feeling invisible in my own skin, felt beautiful under his gaze. When my clothes were pooled at my feet, he didn't pull me to the bed. Instead, he simply looked at me, a soft smile on his lips. "I dream about you," he whispered, his voice husky. "Every night, I dream about this." His hands came up to cup my breasts, his thumbs stroking their fullness with an aching tenderness. "They're so perfect," he murmured, his gaze full of wonder, like twin moons, so pale and lovely. His words were a balm to a part of my soul that had been parched for years. He made me feel like art, like poetry. I, in turn, discovered the landscape of his body. I traced the hard lines of his shoulders, the taut muscles of his back, the trail of dark hair that disappeared below his waist. Every touch was a question, every caress an answer. When we finally came together on the bed, the desperate, frantic energy of our first time was replaced by a deep, powerful current of mutual exploration. We moved together with an intuitive grace, a slow, intoxicating rhythm. It was no longer just about the release of tension. It was about the giving and receiving of a pleasure so profound it felt spiritual. He learned the secrets of my body, the places that made me arch and tremble, the specific rhythm that made me unravel. And as he moved within me, slow and deep, he found that place, that perfect, agonizing point of friction that sent a shockwave through my entire being. A helpless sound escaped my lips. "Oh God, Julian." I breathed, my fingers digging into his back. "Right there." "Yes." "Don't stop." He didn't. He increased the pressure, his movements becoming more deliberate, more intense, pushing me closer and closer to the edge. The pleasure was so overwhelming, it was almost painful. A sweet, exquisite agony. He seemed to sense the moment my control was about to shatter. He leaned down, his forehead pressing against mine, his eyes, dark with passion, boring into me. "Alara," he commanded, his voice a low, rough growl. "Tell me you're mine. Just for now, in this room. Tell me you belong to me." It was a desperate plea, a demand for an emotional truth in a situation built on lies. He wanted to own a part of me, to brand this moment as his, a memory to sustain him in the empty hours of his other life. And in that moment, I would have given him anything. "I'm yours," I sobbed, the words torn from me as the first wave of release crashed through my body. "Only yours, Julian, always." The words were both a lie and the truest thing I had ever said. And as I chanted his name, my body convulsing around him, he found his own release, a guttural cry that was a testament to the power of our connection. Afterward, we didn't separate. We lay wrapped in each other's arms for what felt like hours, the setting sun painting the cheap motel room in shades of orange and pink. We talked. We whispered secrets into the quiet air, confessions about our lonely marriages, our forgotten dreams, our fears for the future. He told me about Chloe's quiet sadness, and I told him about Mark's oblivious stability. We were two shipwrecked survivors, clinging to each other on a makeshift raft, the vast, lonely ocean of our real lives stretching out in every direction. Leaving was the hardest part. The act of putting our clothes back on felt like donning a costume, preparing to step back onto the stage. The silence in the car on the way back was different from before. It was heavy with the weight of our shared intimacy and the melancholy of our impending separation. He would drop me off at my car, and we would exchange a final, chaste look that burned with everything we couldn't show the world. Driving home alone, the scent of his skin still clinging to me like a ghost, I felt a new kind of despair. The labyrinth was getting deeper, the walls closing in. The affair was no longer a simple physical escape. It had grown a heart, a soul. I wasn't just addicted to the sex, to the thrill. I was becoming addicted to him. I was falling into something that felt terrifyingly like love, and I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that I was no longer in control of my descent. I was in free fall, and I had completely forgotten how to fly. The rhythm of our affair had become a steady, secret heartbeat beneath the surface of our lives. We had grown confident, perhaps even arrogant, in our ability to navigate our two worlds. The constant fear of the early days had subsided into a familiar, manageable thrill. We moved through the school with the quiet assurance of expert spies, communicating in a language of fleeting glances and coded emails, our sanctuary carved out of stolen moments and anonymous motel rooms. We had built a beautiful, intricate labyrinth for two, a world that felt more real than the one we presented to everyone else. We were so lost in its intoxicating twists and turns that we forgot that labyrinths are, by their very nature, traps. We had begun to believe we were invincible. And that is when the universe decided to remind us that we were not. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a particularly dreary one where the sky was the color of slate and a cold wind rattled the window panes. I had gone to the art room after my last class, a habit that was now as ingrained as my morning coffee. Julian was cleaning his brushes, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to his elbows, his forearms smudged with green and umber paint. We thought the wing was empty, the last of the student clubs had finished, and most teachers had fled the coming storm. The comfortable intimacy of his studio enveloped us, a warm, paint-scented bubble against the bleakness outside. He smiled as I entered, a slow, private smile that was meant only for me, and my heart did its familiar, treacherous flip. The conversation was easy, comfortable. But as it always did, the proximity, the privacy, the simple fact of being alone together began to charge the air. He put down his brushes and came to me, wiping his hands on a rag. He backed me up against a large, sturdy work table, caging me in with his arms, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated hunger. "I've been thinking about you all day," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "Couldn't concentrate. I just kept picturing you. In my bed. In that motel." He didn't need to finish. I closed the distance between us, my mouth finding his in a kiss that was instantly deep and consuming. My hands went to his hair, his to my waist, pulling me hard against him. We were lost, completely and utterly lost in each other, in the familiar, intoxicating taste and feel of our secret world. We were so lost, we didn't hear the footsteps until they were almost upon us. We had left the door ajar. "Julian, are you in there?" The voice was cheerful, unmistakable. It was Mrs. Gable, the head of the history department, a woman whose friendly demeanor masked an insatiable curiosity. "I just wanted to ask if you had any spare poster board for the history fair." We froze. It was a complete instantaneous cessation of all movement, as if we had been turned to stone. His lips were still an inch from mine, our bodies still flush against each other. My blood ran cold. In my mind's eye, I saw it all with horrifying clarity. The door swinging open, the gasp of shock on her face, the slow-motion destruction of our careers, our marriages, our lives. It all flashed before me in a single, silent, sickening second. Julian reacted first. With a speed I wouldn't have thought possible, he spun me around, shielding me with his body as he took a half-step toward the door, his back to me. His movement was a silent, desperate prayer that she hadn't already seen us. We held our breath. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. I could hear the faint jingle of her keys. "Julian?" she called again, her voice closer now. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure she could hear it. I imagined her peering through the crack of the door, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then, a pause that stretched for an eternity. Finally, the footsteps began to move away, receding down the hall until they were gone. The silence she left behind was more terrifying than her voice had been. It was a vacuum, filled with the sound of our ragged, shallow breaths. We remained frozen for a long time, listening, waiting. Finally, Julian, slowly, silently, crept to the door and pushed it closed, the soft click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the still room. He turned back to me, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The sanctuary had been breached. The passion of moments before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, clammy fear. "Did she see us?" I whispered, my voice a strangled, pathetic sound. I don't think so," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The light is bad in here. I think I blocked her view." But we both knew. We had been reckless. The crack in our perfect facade had just appeared, a jagged, ugly line that we could never unsee. The drive home was a blur of paranoia. Every car in my rearview mirror felt like it was following me. At home, Mark greeted me with his usual oblivious warmth, but his questions felt like an interrogation. "You look pale, Ilara. Everything okay?" I mumbled something about a headache, the lie feeling like ash in my mouth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the room was a new threat. The next day at school was a new kind of hell. The building itself felt hostile. I saw Mrs. Gable by the coffee machine, and she gave me her usual bright, friendly smile. Was it real? Or was it the condescending smile of someone who held my entire life in the palm of her hand? I saw her talking to another colleague later, and when they both glanced in my direction, I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. The joy of the affair, the liberating, life-affirming passion, had been tainted. Now, beneath every stolen glance, beneath every coded message, there was a new undercurrent of pure, sickening fear. The thrill was no longer just about passion. It was about not getting caught. Our labyrinth, which had once felt like a secret, beautiful garden, now felt like a cage. And for the first time, I realized the terrifying truth. The walls were not there to protect us from the outside world. They were there to keep us trapped inside. The fear that Mrs. Gable had planted in us was a slow-acting poison. It didn't kill the affair, but it infected it, changing its very nature. The careless, joyful passion was gone, replaced by a grim, desperate clinging. Our secret meetings became less about pleasure and more about reassurance. Two co-conspirators meeting in the shadows to whisper that they hadn't been caught yet. The euphoria that had once made the world seem brighter now just made the shadows of my real life seem darker, more threatening. I carried the paranoia home with me each night. It was a disease, and soon, the symptoms began to manifest in my marriage, infecting the last remaining pockets of health until the whole thing was septic. The most immediate casualty was intimacy. Mark's touch, once a familiar, benign comfort, became an agony. One evening, I was at the stove, stirring a sauce, completely lost in a memory of Julian's hands on my skin, when Mark came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. It was a gesture he'd made 1,000 times, but this time, my entire body went rigid. A violent, involuntary flinch went through me, and I dropped the wooden spoon with a clatter. It was as if his touch had burned me. I saw the flash of hurt and confusion in his eyes as I pulled away, mumbling an excuse about the sauce being too hot. He didn't press the issue, but a new wounded silence entered the room and took up residence between us. From then on, I was a fortress, and he was the unwelcome visitor laying siege. I created a buffer zone of pillows between us in bed. I feigned headaches, exhaustion, the endless stress of work. I became a creature of excuses. The emotional distance was even worse. I was physically present in my home, but my mind, my heart, my soul, they were always elsewhere, locked away in a secret room with Julian. During a brief, tense meeting in his car, parked in the far corner of a grocery store lot, he confessed the poison was spreading in his own home, too. He looked exhausted, the skin under his eyes bruised with sleeplessness. "We had a fight last night," he said, staring through the windshield. "Chloe. She just started crying at dinner. She said she felt like she was living with a ghost." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a helpless, shared guilt. "She asked me why I never really look at her anymore, why I don't touch her. What was I supposed to say, Alara? That the only person I truly see is you? That your touch is the only one I can feel?" His confession was a cold comfort. We were not just destroying our own marriages, we were destroying them in perfect, tragic unison. The poison was working on us both, rotting our lives from the inside out. The breaking point with Mark came on a Saturday night. It had been a day of crushing silence, of me being irritable and distant, of him being cautiously quiet, tiptoeing around my dark mood. He had tried to initiate a conversation, to plan a weekend trip, to do anything to bridge the ever-widening chasm between us, and I had shut down every attempt with cold indifference. We were sitting in the living room, the television on, but neither of us watching it, the silence stretching until it was thin and sharp. Finally, he turned off the television and faced me, his face a mask of weary sadness and frustration. "I can't do this anymore, Alara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I can't keep living with a stranger. You're here, but you're not. You barely speak to me. You flinch when I touch you. What is going on?" I gave him my standard, weary reply. "I'm just tired, Mark. Work has been stressful." "No," he said, shaking his head, his patience finally gone. "No, this is more than tired. This has been going on for months. This is a cancer in our home. I need you to tell me what's wrong. Is it me? Did I do something?" His voice cracked on the last word, and a part of me, the old me, wanted to reach out and comfort him. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by my secret. I remained silent, and my silence was the only answer he needed. His expression hardened. "Fine," he said, his voice dangerously low. "If it's not me, then there's only one other possibility. Is there someone else, Alara?" The question landed in the silent room like a grenade. The blood froze in my veins. My mind raced, a frantic, panicked scramble for a lie big enough to cover the truth. I looked at his face, at the raw pain and suspicion in his eyes, and I chose to be cruel. It was a defensive act, the lashing out of a cornered animal. "How dare you?" I said, my voice dripping with manufactured outrage. "How could you even think that of me? After everything we've been through, to be accused of that." I stood up, wrapping my arms around myself. "You know what, Mark? Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe you're the one who's unhappy, and it's easier to blame me, to invent some sordid fantasy, than to look at yourself." The lie was monstrous, a venomous twisting of the knife, and it worked. It threw him off balance, shifted the guilt from me to him. The fight devolved from there, ending with no resolution, just two wounded people retreating to separate rooms of a house that no longer felt like a home. Later that night, as I lay in the guest room, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, the weight of what I was doing finally crashed down on me. My first instinct was to blame Julian. He was the one who had set this fire, but as I lay there, a deeper, more difficult truth began to surface. Julian wasn't the arsonist. The foundations of my marriage had been rotting for years. The loneliness, the quiet neglect, the lack of passion, all of it had been there, dormant, long before he arrived. My life with Mark hadn't been a happy home. It had been a beautiful, perfectly maintained museum, quiet and lifeless. Julian hadn't destroyed it. He was simply the earthquake that had finally brought the fragile structure tumbling down. He wasn't the disease, he was the symptom. The poison hadn't come from him. It had been inside me all along, waiting for a catalyst. I had successfully defended my secret, but in doing so, I had declared war on my own life, and the casualties were mounting all around me. The fight with Mark had left a deep, septic wound in our marriage, and my only anesthetic was Julian. I fled from the wreckage of my home and ran straight into the sanctuary of his arms. We met at our usual motel, the anonymous room, a haven from the Cold War I was now waging with my husband. The need for him was more acute than ever, a desperate, physical craving for the escape only he could provide. Our lovemaking that afternoon had a different edge to it. It was less about tender exploration and more about a frantic, almost violent need to blot out the world, to lose ourselves so completely in each other that our real lives ceased to exist. We were two fugitives, and for a few precious hours, this room was our hideout, our last refuge. Lying in the tangled sheets afterward, wrapped in the quiet intimacy of the afterglow, I felt a fragile sense of peace. His arm was a heavy, comforting weight across my waist, his steady breathing a balm to my frayed nerves. It was in this moment of perceived safety, this perfect, temporary illusion of a world that contained only the two of us, that he spoke the words that would shatter everything. "I can't live like this anymore, Alara," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with a weary desperation I had never heard before. "I can't keep going home and lying to her. I can't keep seeing you in pieces, in stolen hours. It's killing me." He shifted, propping himself up on an elbow to look down at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, reckless hope. "Let's leave them," he said, the words, a stunning, terrifying thunderclap in the quiet room. "Let's just go. We could pack a bag and drive. Go west, maybe to Oregon. You could finally write that novel. I could open a small studio, paint the ocean. We could just be us. A real couple, a real life." For a breathtaking, intoxicating moment, his words ignited a fantasy so powerful it stole the air from my lungs. My heart soared. I saw it all with perfect clarity. A small, weathered house on a cliff overlooking a wild gray sea. The smell of salt and turpentine. Waking up next to him every morning, his body warm against mine, with no clock to watch, no lies to tell. I saw myself at a small wooden desk, a blank page in front of me, the sound of the ocean and his distant, contented work in his studio the only sounds I needed. It was a life of art and passion and truth. It was a life where our love wasn't a dirty, hidden thing, but the very sun around which our entire world revolved. It was a beautiful, seductive, and utterly impossible dream. The fantasy shimmered for a glorious second before the first pinprick of reality tore through the illusion. It was an image, unbidden and brutal. Mark's face. Not the angry, frustrated face from our fight, but a different one. A face that was utterly broken, his eyes filled with a bewilderment and pain so profound it would haunt me forever. I imagined myself sitting across from him at our kitchen table, the words "I'm leaving you" hanging in the air like a death sentence. And then another face appeared in my mind. Chloe, a woman I had never met, whose features I could only guess at. A ghost who was, in fact, a real person with a real heart that we would be taking a sledgehammer to. I saw her standing in an empty house, surrounded by the ruins of a life she thought was safe, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The fantasy was incinerated in a firestorm of cold, hard reality. Running away wasn't a romantic escape. It was a campaign of devastation. It was telling my parents, my kind, loving parents who adored Mark, that their daughter was an adulteress who had destroyed her marriage. It was the frantic, tearful phone calls, the shame that would ripple through our families, the ugly gossip. It was the scandal at school. I saw the principal's face, a mask of disappointment and professional obligation. the letters of termination, the disgrace. We wouldn't be a romantic couple starting a new life. We would be the disgraced teachers who had a sordid affair, unemployable, our reputations in tatters. And beneath it all, the ugly, mundane logistics, the lawyers, the venomous arguments over who got the house, the car, the wedding china, the sterile, soul-crushing environment of divorce court, where our beautiful, passionate love story would be reduced to a tawdry legal exhibit labeled infidelity. I looked at Julian, at his hopeful, expectant face, and the most terrible realization of all began to dawn. Our love, this wild, all-consuming thing, thrived in this secret, illicit space. It was potent because it was a refuge from our lives. It was an escape from the boredom, the loneliness, the predictability. But what would happen if it became our life? What would happen when our love was no longer about stolen afternoons in cheap motels, but about paying bills and finding jobs and dealing with the wreckage of the families we had destroyed? The thrill of the forbidden would be gone, replaced by the crushing weight of guilt and consequence. I feared, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the harsh light of day-to-day reality would burn our beautiful, shadowy love to ashes. He saw the change in my expression, the way the light had died in my eyes. "Elara," he said, his voice hesitant. "What's wrong?" I pulled away gently, sitting up and wrapping the cheap motel sheet around my body, a sudden, desperate need for a barrier between us. The silence stretched, thick with the ghost of the beautiful future he had just proposed and the ugly reality I had just murdered. The room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage, and his words had just shown me that the door was a painted illusion. There was no way out. "It's a beautiful dream, Julian," I said finally, my voice sounding hollow and strange. "A truly beautiful dream." I couldn't bring myself to say the next part, but it's just a dream. He didn't need me to. He saw it in my eyes. The hope drained from his face, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. We got dressed in a profound and terrible silence, the rustling of our clothes the only sound. The intimacy was gone, replaced by the cold, hard truth of our situation. We were not star-crossed lovers on the verge of a new beginning. We were two married people in a cheap motel room, and we had just run headfirst into the dead end of the labyrinth we had so willingly entered. The end did not come with a crash of thunder, but with a quiet, mutual surrender. After the terrible clarity of that afternoon in the motel, the fantasy was dead, and we were just two people left standing in its ruins. We met one last time, not in a secret room, but in the open air of a park in a town where no one knew us. We sat on a cold, wrought iron bench, a careful foot of space between us, and watched children play on the swings. It was all so painfully normal. "We can't," I said, my voice breaking on the words I had practiced 100 times in my head. "We can't keep doing this. There's no road from here, Julian. We both know it." He didn't argue. He didn't try to persuade me with another beautiful, impossible dream. He just stared at his hands, his artist's hands that I knew so intimately, and nodded slowly. "I know," he whispered, his voice rough with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "We are a beautiful, impossible thing, Elara, and I suppose it's time to wake up. We didn't kiss goodbye. We didn't even touch. Our final intimacy was a shared look, an ocean of loss, an unspoken love passing between us in a single, heartbreaking moment. And then I stood up and walked away and did not look back. I went home and slipped back into my life like a ghost, repossessing its own body. The Cold War with Mark thawed into a kind of permanent, chilly peace. The fight had cleared the air of expectation, and in its place was a quiet, unspoken agreement to simply coexist. I started playing the part of the good wife again. I would ask about his day, I would initiate conversation, I would endure his touch, but it was all a performance, a meticulous pantomime of a marriage. The house was no longer a stage set for a secret life, but a mausoleum for a dead one. I had successfully protected my secret world, but in doing so, I had sentenced myself to a lifetime of exile within my own home. The true torture, however, was the school. It was a living museum of our affair, and I was forced to walk its halls every single day. Seeing him was a fresh agony each time. We would pass in the crowded corridor, and for a split second, my heart would leap with the familiar, instinctual joy of seeing him. My lips would begin to form a smile. My eyes would light up, and then I would remember. The smile would die, the light would extinguish, and I would force my gaze to the floor. Sometimes, our eyes would meet for a barest fraction of a second, and in that silent, stolen moment, the entire story would play out between us. The first conversation, the stolen kiss, the motel room, the whispered confessions, the heartbreak of our ending. It was a universe of intimacy and loss, all conveyed in a single, fleeting glance before we became strangers again. The art room became a haunted place. I would find myself taking the long way around the building just to avoid walking past its door. On the rare occasion I had to, I would hold my breath, convinced I could still smell it, that intoxicating, damning scent of turpentine and julienne. Every corner of the school held a memory, a ghost. The auditorium stage where we had made love, the empty classroom where he had almost kissed me, the library stacks where we had exchanged frantic, secret touches. I was the curator of 1,000 invisible monuments to a love that no one else knew had ever existed. The affair was over, but it was not gone. It lived inside me, a permanent phantom limb that ached with memory. A certain slant of late afternoon light would transport me back to his studio. The smell of rain on hot asphalt would conjure the memory of our first drive to the motel. I would be lying in bed next to Mark's sleeping, oblivious form, and I would feel a ghost of a touch on my skin, so real, so vivid, that I would gasp and sit up in the darkness. He was gone, but he was everywhere. Now, months later, the ache has dulled to a permanent, low-grade sorrow. My life is what it was before him. Stable, quiet, respectable, perfect on paper, but I am not the same. That woman is gone forever. I think of her sometimes, the sensible, predictable Alara who lived in black and white. She did not know the vibrant, terrifying colors of true passion. She did not know the exquisite pain of a love so powerful it could shatter worlds. Sometimes, I stand here, in my empty classroom, after the last bell has rung, the room filled with the same golden, dusty light of those first afternoons we spent talking. I look out the window at the world moving on without me, and I wonder, was it worth it? Was it worth trading a lifetime of quiet contentment for a few brilliant, incandescent months of feeling truly, painfully, ecstatically alive? The fire is out now. The warmth is gone, and all that remains is the smoke, a permanent haze in my memory, and the chilling, unanswered question that I know will haunt me for the rest of my days.